Welcome to This Is Not About Your Body. I'm your host, Jessie Nealand, and today I'm very excited to welcome Clarkisha Kent, who is a Nigerian-American writer, a culture critic, a former columnist, and an author whose book called Fat On, Fat Off, A Big Bitch Manifesto is going to be released in March. And Clarkisha identifies as fat, Black, dark-skinned, queer, and disabled. And I am so happy to have you on here. Welcome, Clarkisha.
Thank you, Jessie, for having me on. I'm super excited to talk with you.
Yeah, me too. It was really fun to kind of dive into your work as I was preparing for this interview. So I have many questions. So I'm just going to have you start by telling me a little bit about your story, sort of sharing like what it is you do and what your memoir is about.
Okay, so origin story spiel. So I originally hail from Tennessee. And basically I lived there until around 18, you know how that goes. And I moved to Chicago for school. Chicago, while Tennessee is obviously very foundational for me for a lot of reasons, because I also ID as, Black African Southerner. Like that's home right there. I moved to Chicago though, and that's really kind of when I came into myself and like my politics and etc. So shout out to Chicago, beautiful city. And then after college, I moved back, to Tennessee briefly, and that's kind of when my online writing / online media career kind of started. But I was playing around with blogging for a little bit with my best friend, and then I got my first official, quotations, writing job from Aisha Callahan, who was my editor at the time for The Root. She was the very first person, a Black woman, to give me my first writing gig. And after that, it just kind of, obviously the frequency of work that I got was like very, still up and down for obvious reasons, right? But that's kind of where it started. And then since then, I've tried to do my best to kind of like capitalize on that original opportunity. So it led me to writing for places like Entertainment Weekly, BET, MTV. For a while, it was Into More before like the first shuttling of that place. Is back now, but I'm sure my former colleagues still kind of feel a way, because I know I do. I'm not gonna lie. But places like Into More, and there's so many other places on my resume, but that's kind of where it all revolved around. And then around 2018, 2019, my agent, Claire Draper, shout out to them from the, from the Vent agency, slid into my DMs and was like, "So girl, are you looking for an agent?" And I was like, I wasn't, but now that you said that, yeah. Because I didn't know. I knew a little bit from when I was younger, trying to like pitch certain agents, but I really didn't know the process. So I was very blessed and lucky in that regard that my agent just found me. So after that, we signed up properly together. And initially I was going to write a Western, which I am still going to do. It's like
a novel. You write fiction too?
Yes.
Amazing.
I have this whole I have a whole Dropbox vault of stuff like that I've worked on over the years. Some, I finished, some I didn't. My Aries brethren out there understand the starting and stopping nature of our creativity, right? So I really want to do a Western first, because as we know, that genre has been very whitewashed. The original cowboys were not white. They were Latinx, Mexicans in particular, Texans too, and then Black.
Oh my gosh,
Indigenous.
This is so cool.
Listen, okay, so I'm really trying to go back and honor that history. But at the time, my agent was like, "Yes, I want that to happen. But have you considered a memoir?" And I'm not gonna lie to y'all, even now, even after having written one, I personally am like, memoirs are a teensy bit. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Obviously, I'm hungry. Sorry. But memoirs are a teensy bit narcissistic, in nature. Even if they end up having like kind of like a good bent to them, right? Because it's slightly different than biographies in the fact that, you know, at least biographies can kind of pretend to
Uh-huh.
be like objective. They can still have a bent, because I've read some really, you know, some really weird biographies. Like, you clearly had a vendetta against this person, right? But in general, like, they can pretend that they're removed enough from the subject to be objective.
Sure,
From
sure.
a memoir, you know, for the most part, like, this person is telling the story, and this is
Yeah.
the person that experienced everything in real time.
I
So I was
love
kind of
memoirs,
like,
by the way. So I hear you. I've read some bad ones
yeah,
for sure, but also just I love it as
yeah,
a genre.
yeah. It is a very interesting genre still. You know, I've read
Yeah.
some interesting ones as well. So I was kind of like, I don't know if I want to do that. But then I thought about it and I was like, okay, but my life really has been like that dramatic. So I
Yeah,
was like,
yeah.
I might as well do it. And you know, as someone who's Black, disabled, you know, the whole kind of short list that you gave your listeners
Yeah.
at the beginning, it's just a good way for me to like stick my toe into publishing and then kind of take off from there. It's
Absolutely.
a very interesting way to introduce myself, but you know, my career
Yeah.
hasn't really been traditional in any aspect. So I'm like, okay, let's do
I
this.
love that. So for the
So
record, I
now
have
we're
a
here.
book coming out in June. So I'm like on a very similarly timed journey here. And something that I learned by going through this process was basically like that they are constantly gambling on the books they, commission basically. Like it never occurred to me. I'm always like, I've been a reader. I love books. I just sort of thought like if it's good enough, it gets made. But it's very much like they think, okay, what can sell when and how and what story is like it has a market right now. And so I think they very your team, your people very smartly noticed that like the time is now to talk about this stuff. I feel like there really is a need for stories like yours to be told.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed.
Okay. So in let's see, where do I even start? There are so many things here. I don't know if you know much about my work, but I am a body image coach and body neutrality is the work that I do. Body neutrality being sort of defined by the ability to see your body without the added layer of meaning or interpretation or significance is sort of how I define it. So one of the things that is difficult when I talk about body neutrality is the idea that like, it's an alternative to body positivity, but it doesn't feel as good because ultimately for people in marginalized bodies, being able to see your body clearly, it's still shit, right? It's just that you're seeing the shit is the culture. The shit is not your body. Like that's basically the big shift. So I read some of what you wrote about like, I think you used the term cosmic punishment, that your body with all of these things that sort of went against society's idea of what bodies are supposed to be, like that it felt like a cosmic punishment. I love this phrase so much. And I'd love to have you tell me like more about what that means and what that experience was like.
Great question. Excellent question. So, you know, I am very spiritual. I started a couple of years ago, but with everything that's happened in like the last three, I especially had to like dig my heels in. So, for me, when I say cosmic punishment, I'm kind of viewing it in the viewpoint both of like, you know, like standard spirituality, but also like with some references to like Christianity as well, even though I am
Mhm.
thankfully far removed from that religion. So for me, it just felt like clearly I
Huh.
had done something to someone somewhere.
Oh.
I don't know, in the sky, in the ground, IDK. Some deity got pissed at me for doing whatever in my past lives, plural, and was like, okay, because I don't like you. This is the body I'm putting you in. So that's kind of how I felt, particularly with all of like kind of the Christian indoctrination that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
hammered it home for me. But yeah,
That
that
is
was definitely my thought
heavy.
process when I like,
That is a
yeah,
lot to carry. And I'm
yeah,
guessing like you're talking about when you were
yeah,
younger too, which makes it even heavier.
yes,
Like,
yes,
goodness. So how
yeah.
do you
So
think
I
about
was
it
just like,
now?
how I think about it now is like it's like a mixed bag in that like, for example, COVID has been terrible. It's still terrible. I
Mm,
still urge everyone to do as best as you can in protecting yourself, because obviously the government doesn't give a fuck about us and kind of just left us to flail, right? So for
mm,
me, you know, despite like the terribleness of COVID, like the obvious terribleness, it actually really got me to like stop in my tracks and kind of analyze my role, or excuse me, my body's role in what's going on. So it's one of those things, especially when
Mm,
like fat phobic and diet rhetoric started dialing back up
yeah.
around, kind of like the beginning, I don't want to say beginning months, but maybe a year into like the
Yep.
pandemic. People were like, oh, I was sitting inside, I gained weight, da 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 da.
Yep.
And people are doing this complaining. And I'm like, but COVID, like, I mean,
Right. Right.
you want to gain, a few extra pounds versus your immune system is now like dead. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I like priorities, right? But, because of that, because of COVID kind of looming over me, my household, I really thought about the role my body plays in that, like, this bitch is just trying to protect me. Like, obviously society has casted its own aspersions onto my body, and I had a role in that too, in terms of like internalizing. But at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day, I'm not gonna say the whole my body's a temple, because that, again, Christianity. But
Sure.
I will say that my body is like, is my house. It's, my cover. Without my body,
Yeah.
without my body, I can't this, from
Yeah.
a spiritual aspect, right? If once my body's gone, then I'm not tethered here anymore. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought about it like that, and I was like, okay, so you can't just be treating her anyhow just because,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, someone somewhere on the internet doesn't like how it looks. Like, okay,
Yeah.
and you're not gonna beat my ass, so it doesn't matter, So, so yeah, that's kind of how I think about it now.
Oh, that's so interesting. So it sounds like then it's fairly recent for you to find a certain amount of body acceptance. I don't think I realized that from what I was reading. I mean, you're obviously a very prolific writer, so maybe it was just the volume that I was like reading. I was like, oh, you've got this like in the bag. So tell me then, like, what was your body image like before that shift happened? Because that's a long time to go, like really in that dark place of like this body as a punishment.
So I like to be truthful with people and say that the fight is ongoing. Like,
Mm-hmm,
I didn't just
mm-hmm.
wake up one day and be like, oh, I feel great now. There are some days where I feel awesome. Like today I feel great.
Love it.
My body looks great, my hair look great, I got lip gloss on, I feel great. But some days, I don't feel as great. Some days I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, you really look like that? No. So it's one of those things, like I try to hold space for myself no matter what, no matter
Yeah,
what day, whatever day from day to day, how I
yeah.
feel, right? Um, but yeah, part of me having the recent realizations that I also chronicle in the book was the fact that I also wanted to put a spotlight on my age, because
How old are
20s are
you?
rough. 20, I'm 28. I'm gonna be
Okay, okay.
29 this year.
Awesome.
Yeah, so 20s, your 20s are ghetto, okay? They ghetto
Yeah,
as fuck.
yeah.
So I feel like some of us lose sight of that, because there's again so much societal messaging about us having to have it all together and wrapped
Yeah,
up
yeah.
nice in a bow by the time you hit 30. And that's just not realistic. Personally,
When I
I
turned
don't
30, I
believe
was
your
like, good
20s.
riddance.
Right, right. Like I'm ready to put 20s behind me,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean I'll have like all my shit together by the time I hit 30.
Mm-hmm.
Um, me personally, I think people like to say, "Oh, your 20s are your best time." No, 20s are ghetto. It's for you to really figure out your footing without, if you're lucky enough, without like the thumb of your
Yeah,
parents,
yeah,
family, or whatever. So it's like really your like identity building time. And then
yeah,
30s thereafter is just kind of you like figuring out what happens next after that really foundational work. So
yeah.
with that in mind, that's kind of why it was like a recent thing to like feel like kind of be at this place with my body.
Mm. I also hear that I think there's something in the way that you're talking about it where it's more about respect than it is necessarily like I don't know if you identify it as love, but respect is so important to be able to say my body's doing its best, it's protecting me, it's deserving of care and respect. Like I think this is a huge reason I don't do body positivity, right? It's a huge reason I like the idea of neutralities. You can sort of say I'm worthy no matter how I look and no matter how I feel about how I look. My body is worthy no matter how it looks and no matter how I feel about how it looks. And these are things that are just like basic human respect things, as opposed to, oh, I look amazing, I love how I look every day. And that changes everything. I mean, the way that you interact with
Yes.
yourself and the world. I love that.
Agreed. I think it was in Salvation, one of Bell Hooks' books. Forgive me if that's the wrong book, but she had the whole love series that she wrote.
Yeah.
And in her, there's a really important passage in some of the early chapters where she talks about there is no love if respect is not present. Like
Ooh.
oftentimes, people talk about like kind of the trifling shit they do and get away with like people, maybe people in their lives, lovers, friends, or whatever, but they'll be like, oh, it's okay because I love them. And I'm like, no, you don't, because you
Ooh.
don't respect them. You don't give a
Uh-huh.
fuck, because if you did respect them, we're not even talking about love. If you did respect them, you wouldn't feel so comfortable violating them or like
Mhm.
steamrolling their wants and needs, their boundaries.
Yeah.
Like ever since I read that passage, I really kind of looked at myself, right?
Yeah.
I'm not blameless. Myself, my community, my interpersonal relationships, and really thought about that. And I was like, okay, if I feel like that's not at the center of some of these relationships, then either we have to go back to the drawing board, or
Yeah.
I might have to let them slide. I might have to let it go.
Eh,
But that was my thing. I was like,
Yeah.
respect is it.
And
That's supposed to be the foundation of love.
it opens up such an like existential conversation about what love is as well, like the idea of it being a practice, not a like feeling, that it's something that you are dedicated and committed to, not just like a state that sort of lands on you randomly or a mood. I mean, it really opens up a
Yes.
lot, because if we actually as a society believed that about love, like so much shit would be so different. Rom-coms would just be nothing, right? I mean, it would be,
Yeah. They
yeah.
be put out of business more
Yeah.
so than now.
Okay. So one thing that I think I want to have you talk a little bit about is very particularly finding respect for yourself and your body in a body that society says is less worthy of respect. And particularly here, there's two, there are multiple issues, I guess, but the two big issues that I was sort of connecting to as I read your work is being in a fat body and being in a dark-skinned Black body. And these are two things that are just so hugely and like undeniably out there as the signals that you've gotten, that we've all gotten, about what makes a body worthy of respect. So I'm so curious to hear your thoughts on like, what is it like to find that respect in a world that treats bodies like yours like that? Like, yeah. Any thoughts you have? This can go a lot of places.
Yeah. Thank you. So, another great question. So, I would say, like I mentioned in the summary, that it kind of makes the building, like the process of building that respect, nearly impossible, or it makes it, like I mentioned, like very oxymoronic, like the whole, oh, self-esteem, it's self-esteem. And I'm like, that's all
Right.
good and well, but
Mm-hmm.
if you literally have forces working against that
Right.
self-esteem, like it's not really going to be easy to build. And in the worst case scenario, you might just abandon it altogether, because maybe
Yeah.
you don't see that it's worth it. So for me, it definitely was like a constant uphill battle, because, in my case, I obviously came from like a shitty household. So I was already kind of at a disadvantage, like right off the bat. But
Mm,
even for someone, like I've seen some people who have like their families hold them down, like their families are awesome, right? They
yeah.
are the safe space that families are supposed to be. But upon exiting, the world is still like, okay, fuck you. Like, we gonna bully you, right?
Right.
So it's one of those things, like it is a constant uphill battle. So I always tell people who share these identities with me that, like, listen, do not feel bad if like on a given day, you know, the rhetoric is winning. Like, don't feel bad if
Mm,
you really just feel like shit because of what has been said. Like, you're a human being. We are not
Yeah.
impervious to these
Yeah.
kinds of things. Because if we were, the world would look like it would look different.
Yeah.
But you know, the balance comes, or I guess your personal job, like you as an individual, is to just keep in mind that um this is supposed to be a team effort, right? Between you and maybe the people you share these identities with. So by yourself, if you just feel like it's super overwhelming, don't even feel bad. Because again, you're coming up against whole systems, like
Mhm.
systems that predate you and me. So
Yeah.
don't even feel bad if like it seems to be impossible in the moment, because
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
these little systems, they have had practice. Okay. They've had
Mhm.
practice for like the last couple hundred years. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how I look at it. It is still kind of tough, because sometimes when you again internalize, you feel really silly because you know it's not your voice, and yet it's
Yeah. Yeah.
still like, it's like, oh, it still has all this power over me. And I'm like, don't look at it like that. Just look at it as the fact that, like, okay, all right, today you've won today's battle, but
Mhm.
tomorrow I'm gonna be back. I'm gonna be back. I'm gonna be back. I'm gonna get some sleep. I'm gonna drink
Yeah.
my water, and then we're gonna fight. Okay, so that's kind of how I like look at it.
I think that's beautiful. It really invites a lot of like compassion and patience into a process that is, I mean, you're basically just accepting, oh, this is going to be harder for me, for us, than it is for other people, and
Yes.
therefore it's okay for me to struggle. It's okay for me to take my time. It's okay for me to have bad days. I mean, what else can you do? Like that to me sounds so self-compassionate and kind. And it makes space for there to be these moments of like, it won today, but that doesn't mean I give up.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Also, I think in this, it's so important just to like what you said, it was supposed to be a team effort really struck me because, like evolutionary biology, like there's stuff at play that's not even just you versus systems. It's like literally how we evolved was to know ourselves and our value in relationship with our community, and like literally ourselves develop in relationship with our parents. So depending on, or not necessarily our parents, but our, caretakers and attachment figures. So
Yes.
in all of this stuff, like there was supposed to be a very rewarding exchange, so that there is like
Yes.
worth being built inside of you, because there is worth that you see reflected of yourself and other people, right? Like that is what it was supposed to be. And so when you really think about how far society's gotten from that, and how many battles, like for example, you said, having a certain kind of childhood and then going out into this world,
Yeah.
versus like if at least the childhood was this really like boundaried and safe space, and then going out, like it really, I mean, it is overwhelming to think about. Sometimes the idea that, oh, we should all love ourselves and our bodies is more pressure
Yeah.
than
It
it's
is.
worth. Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me about colorism. I'd love to have you define that for the listeners, and then talk a little bit about your experience, and also just like the experience of that in the US.
I should make it clear that, colorism definitely stretches beyond the US.
Oh, of course.
For example, my Indian brethren, they'll tell you at length like the whole caste system that's set up against
Mhm.
them, to fail if
Mhm.
you are dark skinned, right? But in the States, obviously our brand, stems back to slavery, obviously.
Yeah.
But if I'm just offering like a simple definition, then I would say that colorism is particularly a discrimination against darker skinned people of the same ethnic group. Like that is key in the definition, because people try to like conflate it with racism. And
Yeah.
I get what they're trying to say, but like colorism different. Like it's like we're getting deeper into racism, but it's like a
Right.
sub thing. It's like it almost like broke off. It's like a branch. Like it's still part
Mm.
of the ugly ass racist tree, but it's still its own thing.
Yeah.
So based on that definition and based on the history of it here, I would say experience wise, the darker you are, the more issues you'll experience with like, criminality and
Mm-hmm.
incarceration. Like I don't have the link on me now, but one of my mutuals, I believe her name was like Awkward Duck on Twitter. I'll have to go back and check. Sorry, girl, if I fucked it up. But she had shared some articles like a month or so ago, and it talked about how like even when gender comes into play, like the darker you are, the more likely, or at least, the more likely societal forces
Mm-hmm.
are going to hone in on you in terms of trying to incarcerate you. Very
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
So things like that, things like housing, things like jobs, like it goes really deep. Like you'll get passed over for certain jobs depending on the bias of the person in charge. Housing might not be extended to you as easily, again, because of the bias of the person
Yeah.
who owns the property or whatever. So yeah, colorism goes really deep. Usually, unfortunately, a lot of the focus of colorism comes down to like dating. And
Mm.
while it is like kind of reducing colorism to dating can be like childish in a way, I agree. I understand why it usually starts there for people because, sometimes people move very ignorantly when it comes to like these systems because it's not like directly affecting them at the moment. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm guilty of that when it came to like disability. Like I really like it's not that I didn't give a shit, but like I really was not paying attention until I
Sure.
fucked on
Yeah.
my CO. So it's kind of like the same with
Mm.
issues like colorism, right? Sometimes we don't register it until it happens to us again on a personal level. So
Yeah.
when people come up against it in dating, they're like, "Oh wow, this is kind of serious."
Mm.
So
So
with
in dating, you're
dating,
specifically talking about the fact that statistically it is harder for darker skinned Black people to find partners,
particularly women.
particularly women.
There's a whole
Mm-hmm.
conversation where it comes to men, but that's not my ministry. They'll have to talk about that.
Totally
But
fair. Yeah.
I'm a woman, so I'm gonna
Uh-huh.
comment. They'll have
Yeah.
to talk about that. It's a whole can of worms over there. I'm not ready to like talk about. But for me,
Totally fair.
it's definitely tougher dating wise, particularly because there's a lot of extremes. Like either you're like completely ignored or people decline to ignore you, but they're just very nasty to you. And not just like
Mm-hmm.
saying nasty things, just treating you in a poor way. Like for
Uh-huh.
example, maybe I own a club, right? And I decided to bring in all the light-skinned girls, right, from the back of the line. And then I just don't let in any dark-skinned girls. Like really weird and
Yeah.
overt
Yeah.
shit
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that. Like it's not enough that you don't like me, you also have to degrade me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how I look at colorism. It's like not, I mean, it's not harmless, period. But it's like people really go out of their way when you're a darker skinned woman to try to harm you.
Yeah.
And aside from that, like a side conversation would be to talk about how like colorism also complicates gender for darker skinned women. Because a lot of times the darker you are, the more readily society tries to kind of like strip you of your womanhood if that's how you like ID or whatever. Like they'll be like, oh, you're dark. They're gonna be more inclined to masculinize you. Especially if your hair does not look as feminine to them. I talk about a little of that in the book, but it really is a serious issue. I
Yeah.
was talking to some of my girlfriends a couple months ago, and we had a whole discussion where we were like, oh, after our big chop, I was misgendered so many times, like
Mm.
just aggressively, and then you would correct people and they just look bewildered because they just really assume that you're a man. And I'm like, do y'all don't realize how
Right.
fucked up that is? You don't? Yeah, I have to cuss you out first for you to realize how fucked up it is. Okay.
Mm.
But I think that would be for me kind of like my spiel on colorism, like in a shortened way.
Yeah.
Obviously if I was doing a TED talk, I would have like graphs, I would have the whole
Oh, we
history,
could
I
go
would have
on.
it all laid out. Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's kind of like my like mini spiel on it.
Uh-huh. Well, thank you for sharing all that. Something that I've always thought was really interesting. is the way that some of the like statistically least desirable on, like dating apps, for example, are very dark-skinned Black women and very like short or small Asian men. And what's so interesting about that, I think, is that if you flip to the other gender in both of these cases, we have people who are being extremely fetishized and sexualized,
Yes.
like very petite
Yes.
Asian women,
Yes.
extremely fetishized and sexualized, big, masculine, very dark-skinned men, extremely fetishized and sexualized. So it's so interesting that that is like such a direct,
Yes.
like that it's such a direct binary. And yeah, I mean, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on it. I've just always found that so fascinating.
I think, my briefest answer, because like I mentioned, I would have to do a whole like write up.
Uh-huh.
My briefest answer would be to say that like it's still the same oppressive force at work. It just so happens that like that other side that's being fetishized is like in a way like supposedly giving the less harmful, it's not harmful, right, but like the less harmful
Yeah.
version of the oppression that's going on.
Uh-huh.
Now obviously fetishization is terrible because people will do a lot of weird shit to you based on their weird fetish, right? But when you're looking at it systemically, it looks on the surface as if it's not harmful. So
Yeah.
people that are kind of pushing this oppressive force are like, oh, I know, I'm treating your like darker sister over there like real terrible, but like you're not the same. So like I'm gonna fetishize you. And it won't be as bad technically, but like I still don't see you as human in the same
Yes.
way that I don't see your sister as human. But I'm still like attracted to you, so that's okay. Like it's like people literally like think like that. And I'm like, that's scary. Like
So that
that's
is it.
scary.
That is so true. This idea that like because it's sort of positive as opposed to negative, we imagine that the fetishization is a good thing, that it is like, oh, sure. It's like the thing of I can't be racist because I sleep with, so and so, right? Like
That's it.
it's
That's
this
it.
idea that if there's attraction, there must be humanization, but there's absolutely not. And in fact, fetishization and oppression, like they're both dehumanizing. It's just that
Yes.
one of them is being used in a different way. Like that's
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
something
It's
also
supposed to be
is,
seen as a positive, but no.
yeah, I always say too, like objectification of women, we can all name the examples that are like sort of catcalling, for example, right? It's like it's a quote unquote positive thing that this random construction worker is calling out. It's like that you're hot.
Yeah.
But what it really is that he feels entitled to tell you what to do to be pleasing, right? And like that he feels entitled to your body, entitled to you to be attractive to him, like smile, baby, that kind of thing, right? It is exactly the same thing to tell a non-conventionally attractive person on the internet that like she should lose weight because it's entitlement. It's like you owe me an attractive appearance. It's the same exact thing. It's just that one supposedly was a compliment, even though it's super oppressive. The other
Yes.
one is just obviously oppressive, right? It's like it's the
Yes.
same exact thing. It's objectification and dehumanization.
Yes.
And also something you talk a little bit about gender essentialism in your work. And I love that, like, I'm also bi, so that bisexual experiences sort of like led you to it. But I also think there's something in this where it's like, you know, uh, Asian men are seen as too feminine. And like you just said, dark-skinned Black women are seen as too masculine. It's also like it just fits this idea of what people are supposed to be according to this binary gender essentialist view that doesn't make space for humans.
Yeah. I also want to point out that like obviously it's a racial thing too, like in terms of like people are basing all these gender notions off of
Yeah.
like white
Mm-hmm.
supremacy. So
Mm-hmm.
like, and like I mentioned, Christianity plays a huge part. Like people really try to, make all sorts of arguments, like bend backwards to be like, oh, that's just bad Christians that are da, da, da.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's the whole religion, baby. It's the whole doctrine. and they can't even play me because I've read this stuff. Like I was
Yeah.
in that Sunday school reading. I've seen
Mhm.
it, right? People take whatever passage they deem necessary to like really push this racist, gender essentialist
Yeah.
view of what bodies should look like, whether it's fat, skinny, masculine, feminine, does not matter. Like they really are like, okay, according to the Bible, according to this, according to that, you should look this way. If you don't look this way, then you're going to hell, like something like that. So it goes back to that binary that is, that leaves no space for you if you are not white,
Yeah.
if you are not thin, if you are not straight, and we can keep going, but
Yeah. And that reminds me, by the way, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about the term misogynoir, because I feel like just a few minutes ago, actually, probably would have been a good moment to pause there. But it's a really important term. It's a really important concept. And yeah, if you wouldn't mind, like maybe, I don't know about defining it exactly, but talking a little bit about what that is.
mhm. So the term was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. I forgot exactly what year, but just know I was probably not alive. I don't know, but
Hmm.
but she coined it, and to put it like very simply, like I said, there is like a more detailed definition. But if I'm like, if I'm compressing
Hmm.
it, I would say that it's the intersection between racism and misogyny, but for like Black women in particular.
Yeah.
So it literally traces like how this like racist society treats us based on those intersections. So like I mentioned, um Black women in general, I would say, obviously colorism plays a factor, but Black women in
Right.
general, like people really play with us about our gender. Like, being Black, they really are like, you don't fit, or they keep moving the goalpost, right? So that's
Hmm.
why I always get really like irritated within my community when I meet transphobes, because I'm like,
Mm.
y'all, like they believe this same shit about us. Like you're trying
Right.
to act like that's like someone else's problem. And I'm like, people call our gender into question all the time. So trying to align
Oh, that's
yourself
interesting.
with,
Yeah.
I guess, the dominant oppressive force
Hmm.
is not going to help you, because once they're done with that person over there, it's you next. You're
Yeah.
next. Like you're trying to act like, being cool with them is going to help you. And no, it's not. The goalpost will always be moving as long as, our Blackness is like a factor.
Yeah. So it's what you just said, I think, that like beauty ideals, Western beauty ideals, were created within white supremacy, and not even just white supremacy, right? Like very
Mhm.
particular European features being like upheld as this ideal. And then it's like the further and further a person gets away from it, with very few
Yes.
exceptions, you just sort of lose the like status or whatever as,
Yeah.
being close to this ideal. And so really what we're talking about is people whose identities put them the furthest
Yes.
from this
Yeah.
European light-skinned like ideal. And not just, oh, okay, so like you don't get to be seen as like beautiful. It's so much more than that. It's obviously, like you said, it's the oppression of housing and, medical care and all of these things that are
Yep.
so fucked up and dangerous. But also in terms of like dating, for example, or just basic human respect.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I also just like, as a writer, I just think it's such a great word. It's just such a great word for the concept, right? Like it's just so beautiful. Misogynoir. Like, I mean, I love a portmanteau, and I just feel like yeah, it's a great one.
It's great.
Um,
It's succinct. Like I
yeah,
immediately, when you say it, I immediately know, what you're talking about. You
exactly.
can, yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same. Okay, so here's the thing I've been most excited to talk to you about after going through your site was the Kent test. So this is, I am assuming most people listening are probably familiar with the Bechdel test, about basically, I'm blanking on the history of it, but basically whether or not two characters in a scene are of any movie or TV are not talking about men or not being men. It's basically like a sexism test that was never really intended to be, but
Yeah.
just to like critique media, movies, TV, etc. Now, tell me about the Kent test that you made up.
Okay, so the Kent test made up back in 2018. It actually came out on International Women's Day in 2018. And I had originally partnered up with Equality for Her, and we did like a whole like representation like packet. So there was the test and like terminology and et cetera, et cetera. Equality for Her is not really a thing anymore, but for
Mhm.
me, I really wanted to keep the test. I was like, this is very important. So I actually came up with the test for like a variety of reasons, but like what really did it for me was Nicole Bahari's treatment on Sleepy Hollow. Fans of that show know that she was fucked over. Like she was like one of the main attractions, and they pushed her aside. Because ableist, because she actually has an
Mm.
autoimmune disorder. So they were just like, I guess they didn't want to deal with her and the inconvenience of her being sick to them, right?
Oh,
And
interesting.
then
Yeah.
on the second, like on the flip side of that, obviously racism, because like
Mhm.
the first person they replaced her with was this like uninteresting like white female character. And I'm like, of course, of course. So they really just like did her dirty. And I was just like, I could just complain, which, I'd be doing that anyway sometimes. I'd be
Yeah,
like, I'm
yeah.
going to complain. I'm mad. But I was like, I could just complain, or I could complain and like do something. So I came up with the test. I watched not just that, but like a couple of different pieces of media before I like cemented um, what I felt about it. Some of those pieces include Black Panther, like the first film, because the film was very like woman centric. Like Charles there, and he's still doing his thing or whatever, but like when he's like outside the movie for a second, it's the women who are the stars,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So based on some of those pieces, I put it together, and I was like, okay, so this what I'm gonna do. Like they need an arc. They need to make sure they're not fetishized. There needs to be interactions between more than one Black female character, or like a non-white woman.
Yeah.
Because I don't like tokens. So basically consuming a media for as long as I have and as critically as I have made me feel like, okay, like I know the criteria that I look
Yeah.
at certain pieces of media with, but I need to write it down. I need to write
Yeah.
it down because it's important for people to have the language. It's very likely that other Black women or other non-white women have like had the same critiques on these pieces of media that I did, but maybe just didn't have the verbiage.
Yeah.
So as someone who was actually an English major at the University of Chicago, I was like, okay, it's important to me to
Yeah.
always have the right words, the right
Mhm.
verbiage. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna put on paper, and then we're gonna see where this all goes.
Okay, so to clarify, because I don't think I said this, so the Bechdel test is used as a tool to sort of measure and critique the amount of sexism in a piece of media. And the Kent test
Yeah,
is exactly the same, but used to measure the amount of racism in a piece of media. So what you're talking
yeah,
about,
racism and misogyny. Yeah,
racism and misogyny, so it combines them. But the thing that you're talking
yeah,
about here is the unique needs for critiquing racism, because again, I think it would be too easy to say, oh, a person of color was displayed as a prominent character, but if they were fetishized, that really doesn't, like, so because there were unique
it doesn't do
uh
anything.
right, there are unique needs, and you pulled them together after, I mean, this just sounds like it was always meant to be your your job. It's
Yeah,
so up your alley, so right in your wheelhouse, to pull this together. And I'm with you on like finding the exact right language for things. So you created this tool and this sort of test that people can use to sort of assess and critique the media in that way.
yeah.
I love that.
And thank you. Yeah, because it's egregious sometimes. And for media, I know people are really here to we really tired, sorry, of hearing about, representation. And, admittedly, the concept definitely has been beaten to death in the States, particularly where politics are concerned, or politicians, because
Mhm.
they love to adopt messages and then water them down. We've seen it time and time again. But for me, as someone who does look at media critically, I think it's important to do so because, like, there are so many messages that we unconsciously absorb by not critically looking at things.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example, right? So two examples actually. So on one hand, I remember some time ago, maybe weeks or months ago, I was sitting with my sister. We were watching, I think, Abbott Elementary or something else. And mind
I
you, this
love
is
that show.
Hulu, and we hanging out or whatever, and the commercials came on. So I usually mute the commercials anyways, because I don't want to hear all that bullshit.
Yeah.
So on the TV that day, when I muted, there was like commercials for like Papa John's or like another pizza joint. Like it's at least 2 pizza commercials. Mind you, I muted it. I went away to go do something else, right? And then I came back when it was done. Now, sometime later, I don't remember if it was the next day or hours later, but sometime later, I was suddenly like, you know what? I want some pizza. Right? So like it doesn't seem like, because I didn't sit there and actually watch it and hear, I didn't hear none of the specials, but still it was enough for me to have seen the image for me to be like, oh, I want some pizza. And that kind of stuff happens all the time, even on social media. Like you won't be paying attention to nothing, but you'll be scrolling, and maybe later you either see an ad related to the very thing you passed, which is freaky, obviously, or like it'll somehow like incept itself into your brain, and now you're thinking about that thing you just happened to pass. You didn't even stop and look at it. So that's one thing. The other thing that I want to bring up is, because I'm based in Virginia, right? And I particularly want to highlight like Glenn Youngkin's campaign. Now, fuck him. I hope one day he fall in a ditch. I don't care for that man. He's very hateful. Very hateful. He's a hateful man. Like no matter what political, whatever thing you identify with, he's very hateful. Like just like a white supremacist through and through.
I'm in North Carolina, by the way, so I understand.
Yeah. So, but the one thing no one can take away from him is the fact that he ran a great media campaign. Like when I was on Hulu, I could not go 2 seconds without seeing an ad from his campaign. It got so intense that after he was elected, I just so happened to ask some of my peers who were like in the area or right outside of Virginia if they had even heard of the other candidate. And they couldn't tell me.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, they couldn't tell me. And I'm like, that's how powerful media is.
Yeah.
So I always encourage people to really look critically at what you're being fed on this TV or on this movie or whatever, because so many things have a so many things are just propaganda. They just dress it up real nice. I think it was Malcolm X that said that like, media is like the propaganda arm of the US in terms of like, racism, imperialism, colonialism, like we can keep going. But like it really plays a role in how things function in the States. So I'm always going to be like, everything is up for critique. Look critically at everything, even things you don't think are that serious.
So I completely agree. The impact that this stuff has on us is huge. Obviously, when it comes to like beauty ideals and the work that I do with clients, I'm often kind of put in a position of, I don't want to tell people what to do exactly, but inviting critique, inviting more awareness of how things are impacting them, because so many people have their feeds full of like, conventionally attractive influencers, for example, and then they wonder why they don't feel good enough. These things are so, so deep. And again, it goes back to evolutionary biology. We are not going to outthink this by being like, oh, I'm aware that that's a filter. Like that's not enough. When it's blasted into your brain every day and you start to feel like this is what's good and everybody likes it, you just see those numbers, you see that, that shiny world. And it goes so far beyond, oh, I know this is fake, because like your genetics don't, right? Like you can consciously say, oh, that's not real, but it doesn't matter. And what you're saying, it just really aligns with that like being critical of these things and having an awareness of how they're impacting us is huge, and not trying to or rather not letting our ego maybe be like, oh, it's cool. I can outthink that.
Yeah, I'm so above influence or corruption or, just Like
I would
people
never
really
order pizza after
think
seeing a
like,
pizza commercial.
yeah, like, you know, people really think they're above that stuff. Like they can't
Yeah.
be corrupted, or like they
Yeah.
just can't be like just spoon-fed propaganda in that way. And I'm like,
Like
okay,
it's
like
not an
you,
issue of willpower or logic. It's
no, it's
not.
not. No.
Yeah.
Mm.
Amazing. Well, I encourage everyone. I mean, I'm going to link to your website in the show notes anyway. And I recommend everybody go check Clarkisha out, because some of the writing in the blog and everything is just chef's kiss. But specifically, you have a whole like tab for this test. So I encourage people to go check out the Kent test. I think it's such a cool tool for us to be able to use and think more critically about the media we consume.
Yeah.
Okay, so anything else that you wanted to talk about today? Anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to?
You know, I just want to shout out my book, obviously.
Yes,
It
please.
comes out on March 7th of this year. So we about like 17-ish days away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just bought my book. That's gonna be my first book of many, you know, and you could find it on Feminist Press's website, feministpress.org. They're my publisher. Shout out to them. But you can also find it where other books are sold, or, you know, also used in a library, which also plugging my love for libraries. Go support your local library. Go get a freaking library card. I don't know. Go there. I don't know. Have a picnic, something. Go incorporate the library into your life. Okay. You know, and they just don't deal with books. They be having classes. I've seen some that have like cooking classes and like classes for like becoming handy, DVDs, cassette tapes, doesn't matter. Like the library is such a wealth of knowledge and community, and people should know that, based on how hard a lot of these mayors and other politicians are trying to like squeeze them out of existence. So go support your local library. Libraries are the reason I am who I am, because like when I couldn't get any peace at home, guess where I was? The library. So that's my side spiel. But yes,
Love it.
you can borrow Fat Off Fat On, hopefully from your local library. If it is not there, don't worry. Literally just talk to your friendly librarian and be like, hey, can I request this book? And they'll do it. So yeah, plug in my book, get it from Feminist Press. You can get it from Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, doesn't matter. But yeah, that'd probably be it in terms of like, sorry, let me back up. The name of the book is Fat Off, Fat On, a Big Bitch Manifesto. Just in case I didn't mention that. I know, Jesse, you did, but you know, for symmetry's sake, want to mention it at the end too. As far as where to find me, I'm on Twitter right now while the app is still alive at @iWriteAllDay_. And then I'm on IG as @Clarkisha Kent. I am also on Hive Social at Clarkisha Kent. Most places you'll find me at Clarkisha Kent. And then there's my website, www.clarkishakent.com. And yeah, I also have another media test in the works, but y'all will see that
fun.
soon. So, yeah.
Oh, I love that. I can't wait to see. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here, Clarkisha. It was an absolute pleasure. I think that this podcast will probably be coming out very close to your book release date. So that'll be cool. And I look forward to reading it myself. And yeah, I hope it does awesome. And I look forward to seeing where you take everything else as well. So thank you for being here. And everybody, thank you for listening to my podcast. You know where to find me, JessieNealand.com, and on Instagram @JessieNealand. And that is it for today. And I'll catch you all next week.